Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Comics on Tiny Mushroom with your hosts Jack and Zach. Now, today we're going to be dissecting the film Logan, and this isn't as much a review of sorts because I think we generally agree with like a lot of the other consensuses that it's a good film. It was definitely worth watching. Definitely going to look forward to picking up on DVD or whatever streaming service.
We know what it does. We know what other people think.
Yeah.
You don't need a rehash of that in yet another video. So.
Yeah. What we're looking at today, though, is that how this film stands within the comic book movie industry as a whole, because this film does a lot of things differently, and especially for like a non-MCU title, I think it brings a lot more things to the table, and these are the things that we need to talk about, because I feel like we're going to come up towards, I think, not quite a rated R, boom, but I feel like this film's going to push a lot of things forward. So let's just start talking about the fact this film's rated R. Now, we already had Deadpool last year, which, showed like, the more lighthearted.
The way to go sort of thing.
Lighthearted and quite funny, that fit the character fine. And that was more humor than like violence heavy anyway. So that worked. And some people sort of dismissed Deadpool as like a one-off. We're not going to get many Deadpool knockoffs because that's sort of the joke. When they announced that Logan was going to be like a rated R or an 18, depending on your region,
I think you sort of knew it was going to be a different R. You know what I mean? It was always going to be a gritty version where there was never going to be like huge zinger jokes anywhere. It was going to be very much the R was going to be in the swearing, in the blood, in the themes that were going on.
Yeah, I think I'm quite happy about that, because when we also found out they're going with Old Man Logan, we already knew what kind of tone it would bring. And talking about, the tone that this film has briefly, it's quite amusing that this is like the 9th or 10th X-Men film entry, and especially as we talk about stagnation as like series and universes go on, this is by far the most tonally different X-Men film we have ever gotten. It's not like it's typical blockbuster like the first three, or shit like the other two Wolverine films.
What? Careful. I like those. Just like Green Lantern.
You're serious?
Yeah, I really like the Silver Samurai one. Anyway, we're not talking about that for now, luckily, because I'd get slated. What's interesting about you talk about the tone and the fact it brings off the Old Man Logan vibes, it's actually, from what I've seen of Old Man Logan, or read rather, it's very loosely based on it, and it actually takes a lot of its themes and tropes from westerns, as we can as we can quite clearly see in the super obvious example of Shane in the hotel.
Yeah, definitely, because I think the director's chosen like a lot of focal points as well, and I think he even chose like a few Western films, maybe late Clint Eastwood, because Hugh Jackman's definitely rocking the age look, and it's
It's like, I use it's not a Western analogy, but it's like the tired Rocky. When in Rocky 5, when he finally gets beat, it's very much that.
Funny thing about that, actually, there's a Mickey Rourke film called The Wrestler.
That's another one, yeah.
That was one he used as one of the focal points, just showing that tired and aged and just beaten down by life as well, which is fitting considering it is his last performance. Spoilers, just in case you didn't get that already.
We will put the spoiler in the title.
Yeah, but it's nice.
Your fault if you didn't read it.
It's nice seeing the directors really do that, taking helm and really finally putting their own unique spin on things.
It's nice that they don't feel that they have to just completely rely on the comic books, that they can, regardless of it being a comic book movie, they can put it in a different genre as they want.
I also think, just briefly going back to when we talked about what makes this film like an adult rating, obviously the swearing and the partial nudity and the blood and the hyperviolence and all that sort of stuff. This is a great example of how to use all of those right. So it's not like where you're bending the rules, where Captain America or Iron Man can say bastard and it's used as a joke. That's a really cheap way of trying to promote a rating, or seeing how far they can push it. This is like, if we're going to go with this kind of story, we need to go with it, and we need to adapt it into the plot as well. Let's not make it super obvious where our cuts are going to be. So
I mean, even at the start, they get you used to that straight away. Yes, at the start there was perhaps a little bit more bloodshed than you'd expect, having watched the whole film and having that hindsight. But it really gets you used to that sense. There's like lots of swearing in the opening scene, and there's this very gritty sense, and from then on in, you know what you're in for.
Yeah, definitely. And even like some of the more, even as it goes on, that hyperviolence doesn't change. Even here, you get to hear Patrick Stewart swear.
Yeah.
It's so refreshing. I think that's the one thing. If you had to put like Tiny Mushroom's one word review, if this was a review, refreshing.
For sure.
Now, going back to a little bit about the tone of this film, so we've already talked about how it borrows quite heavily from Western elements and from that tired perspective. Another trend that it breaks, and that I think we need to see more of in the industry, is the dialogue in this film.
It's very heavy, isn't it?
Very, very heavy, and it does suffer a bit from the third act battle, a little bit, but I think
I'd
not
have
throughout.
to debate that because of how low key that is. I really don't think I can criticize that third act, because it's still got the final battle is really short, and yes, you can say what you want about that because there are certain issues with that. But up until then, there's still a lot of conversations going on, and meaningful conversations, which is the important thing.
And I think one thing they does significantly better, because we've already talked about how a lot of films, not just action films as well as superhero films lumped into that, have a good amount of character development and a good amount of story beats that just all goes to shit when the third act big fight scene comes in. This one takes a lot longer to get there, but you still have the character development running through it. There's motive and there's incentive to it, so it's quite refreshing. And also, one other thing as well, it's nice just having a few focal characters.
Yeah, it's much easier to focus yourself on that, especially when we're so used to having at least a team of 4 or 5 in the past few films, whether it be DC or Marvel.
And especially considering that, for the most part, X-23 doesn't talk for a good amount of the film. So it's purely just Wolverine and Professor X having, the back and forth between each other. And that helps show the relationship between them.
It's very much a family affair, isn't it? Like, this is the one superhero film where I feel like the audience can empathise so much more, because you've got the plastic protagonist in Logan, you've got the ailing parent in Patrick Stewart's Professor X, the unruly child, the drug addiction that Logan goes through. So in a lot of senses, that is what a lot of families go through, but you've just got it in a setting which is slightly more extreme in the mutant world. In that sense, the family aspect and having those subtle undercurrents really enhances the R-rated, the violence, because you just don't expect it. And then you get this scene that comes after a very long elongated act 1, which a lot of dialogue happens but not so much action after the first scene, and you just get the kid wailing on these soldiers that are trying to capture it, and gore with kids is not something that you expect whatsoever until that happens, and that borderlines, I think, on the 18 rating,
exactly,
which is what makes it so shocking when you've got these such subtle tones underneath, and it just all every so often it just goes explodes into these really unexpected situations.
Now, these have all been our thoughts on the film so far, because we've sort of kept it quite contained. We said here's the elements that we want to unpick, and here's the parts which we think work. Now I want to get to the more meatier end of the conversation and think, how is this film going to have an influence within the wider thing? Because if there's one really good thing that the movie industry is doing, is just aping off other popular things.
Yeah, we had the news that Venom was going to be a horror movie, so obviously that's going to be a theme for a couple of movies after that, I'm assuming, for comic book films. We've got this as the sort of Western gritty drama, which I think again will be actually a rating, will be a genre off of the R rating, because we've got comic book films, we've got R-rated comic book films, and now we've got genres off of those, so it's just even more diversified.
Oh, so you think that this is another baby step forward into truly diversifying, not just Captain America's a war film or Thor's a fantasy. These are tonally different. The skeleton that makes this film is different from your Hulks and your Avengers and stuff.
The Thor is a comic book film with fantasy elements, whereas this is pushing more towards the Western, as a gritty drama with comic book elements, rather than the other way around.
There's that pessimistic side of me where Fox never know what they're doing with the timeline.
Have you seen how convoluted it is? It literally doesn't matter anymore. You go see the movie knowing that it may or may not be canon, and if it is, we'll deal with it later.
We'll deal with that headache later when someone wants to make an infographic on
the thing that really confuses and amazes me in this one. And this is slightly indulgent in that it doesn't necessarily answer the topic of the video, but still super cool. Is that they have comic books within this film, and I just couldn't not say that. How they have these mythical X-Men in the films, and Logan just can't relate to it whatsoever. He just goes, "What is this? Is this this kid's reading this?" And he just throws it away. I just think that's fantastic.
And I like
that
how
subversion is just.
I love how it's it's this is the comic book of the universe X-Men, Because he starts off in the first X-Men film saying like, "What do you expect? Blue and yellow spandex," and now we never do see him in the spandex. That's one bad film. That's one bad point about this film. We never see him in that spandex.
How much of a standout point would that be? That would just not suit this film whatsoever. which is a really good point. That's a really good point to say that this film does its job in that having a superhero as we see them normally would just be so out of place.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think this is one of the. This is probably. I know it's a bit of a weird example to draw, but this film is so comfortable within its own sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you feel like, say, X-Men Origins Wolverine felt quite committee designed.
I think the word you mean is amazing.
I don't like Will.i.am as a mutant, alright? Or fucking Ryan Reynolds as not Deadpool.
Well, he was.
No, he wasn't.
Well, kind of.
But the timeline's fucked anyway, so we can't even... We don't even know. We don't even know, man. But it feels like all the elements have been put together in a quite neater package. This film's comfortable with the themes it's expressing. Nothing seems quite forced, and that ultimately comes down to, obviously he's a character who's been around for nearly 18 years.
Much.
Like, it helps that when we got Guardians of the Galaxy, once again a comic book film with space, sci-fi, and comedy elements. It helps that that was a standalone product. No one really knew who that was. Everyone knows who Wolverine is.
Yeah, that the first act where I mentioned that is so dialogue heavy and that he's just driving his limo picking up people, and then eventually he gets into the X-23 part. The fact that they don't have to do any character development, like meaningful character development in there, because they're just making the best assumption possible that everyone knows what Wolverine's about. And then there's subtle currents within the film to remind you, just in case you're not sure.
Yeah.
But to have that there's backlog of movies behind you, just helps this film so much, and that it doesn't waste time with that, and the time it saves, it puts into really, really good dialogue.
Definitely, and that's a bit of a concern going forward. Like, for those who want to take inspiration, they don't have that longevity behind them. So it's like every time they do a new Spider-Man film, it's got to be Uncle Ben died.
I wish they just took that step and just thought, no, everybody knows who Spider-Man is, regardless of if you haven't seen a film, you know who Spider-Man is, and just use very subtle currents within the film, like just childish jokes here and there, to bring back that sort of like playful Queens sort of like teenage boy. That's all you need. You don't need a whole 20-minute sequence in the beginning. And this is a pure inspiration for Logan. I think that they need to do that.
Do you think there's any other chances of? Because obviously who knows what's going on with the X-Men series? Like, we literally have got no clue whatsoever.
Literally, like on their release dates for Fox, they don't even put titles. It's just they have a movie for this date, and this is when it's going to come out. But it might change. There's no titles whatsoever for Fox.
Exactly. Obviously now they've started filming the Avengers Infinity War. So Phase 3 is wrapping up now. Starting to come, into the maturity. When I say maturity, I don't mean maturity as in we're getting our R-rated films. I mean as in we're reaching the point where we're all used to it
like
now.
The crescendo of
Marvel. Yeah. We're pretty much on its way out now. This is more to say, okay, what else can we dig up now? Do you think this film is important enough to have an impact later on? Because when I first started looking at reviews for this film, the comparisons came out. This is the best superhero film since Dark Knight. Now that means a lot to me, not just as like a comic book fan, but as just a fan of film in general. Because the Christopher Nolan trilogy is an entity in itself. Is that it uses comic book elements, but it is thriller and it is action.
Very much. Yeah.
You do not have to have the slightest inference of comic book knowledge beforehand, because it's just a good standalone film with comic book elements in it.
I don't think that, going back to your question, I don't think that it will have an effect on Phase 3 whatsoever, unless it's your sort of Ant-Man sort of character that doesn't matter so much in terms of the Infinity War, whereas with your Doctor Stranges and Captain Americas and so forth, if he does come back, I don't think it will have any impact whatsoever. I think the impact will be seen after Phase 3, when the Marvel Studios feel like they have to eke out a lot more films.
Do you think that, when we get into the Infinity War and we have our great goodbye to all these characters, do you feel it's going to be emotional in the aspect of, obviously X-23 taking the cross, putting it on its side?
When that happened, when they put it in the ground like that,
yeah,
I was like, why don't they put it like that? And they did. And I was like, I could be a director.
I saw that and I was like, oh, please.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Just crushed it.
Crushed it. Like manly tears were shed.
Yeah.
Manly tears were shed. But I was thinking, because obviously we're going to be seeing Chris Evans as Captain America, and these characters we've only ever seen portrayed by one actor realistically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we're going to get that sort of payoff, that sort of emotional payoff? Because I don't think we are. I think that
I think there's slightly too much damage being done with the formula, and as we get another 6 films or whatever, we'll be in phase 3. I think that formula, regardless of how good the characters are, I think we'll just be constantly going, another final actor, another comic book trope. I think it needs to reinvent itself, even in phase 3.
I think one of the best things I can say about like this film, not just as a standalone product, is this is the last film with its main actor, and it's the 10th film, and it's probably the best one. That's how rare is that in any media, not even in comic book films, just in any franchise in general. Who says like this is the big send off, this is the totally different one, and this is the one that everyone should be like, okay, then come on, bring it on.
People are assuming this is a bit of a money maker, like a last send off for Hugh Jackman on his retirement paycheck. It's very much not. Going back to the MCU, I think what will make me sort of have those sort of reminiscing feelings of Captain America and Iron Man will actually be rewatching Captain America 1 and Iron Man 1, because I think those are I'm predicting that those, when we've had phase 3, will be the best versions of those characters.
Thanks very much for watching our thoughts on Logan and just how it's going to possibly influence films going into the future, and how we just feel about it, in the current state of comic book movies. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and also we still love hearing your thoughts about how we think that the comic book medium is going to evolve and how the film universe is going to treat it. So if you have any thoughts on that, please let us know in the box below, and we'll see you next time for the next episode.
See you next time.